All right, welcome to Building on Your Land with Berks Homes. I'm Bryan Entrekin with the Berks Homes on Your Land department, and we're happy to be joined today for our next episode here with, which we're going to get into the topic here in a minute. It's going to be mainly focusing on septic systems, kind of the first stage of that. But happy to have Brent Hershey, who's the owner of Environmental Design Service.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and Natalie Lonsinger, who's the Director of Operations for, I call it EDS for short.
It's easier.
It is
easier. It is easier, and that's what
right.
around here. You guys have done a lot of work with us over the years. We appreciate all the and top notch service so far. Anyway, so we thank you for all you've done for us and our customers. So
yeah,
and great feedback from everybody that we have had work with you. I never really got to share all that with you, but I wanted to let you know.
That's awesome.
But
well, we love working with you guys too. So thank you very much.
Yes.
We appreciate the opportunity.
No problem.
Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you so much. And so before we get kind of into the topic here, can you just kind of explain what does EDS do as a company? What services you offer?
Sure, I'll jump in there. We are a environmental design service. So what that means is we do stormwater infiltrometer testing. We'll do septic soil consulting and perc and probes, and then ultimately a septic design. So our main objective is really septic designs and stormwater infiltrometer testing. So in our septic and then stormwater pieces of the business.
And soils testing.
And soils testing, for the designs.
Yes.
And some consulting as well. But the septic design and I would say infiltrometer testing are our two main bread and butters. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Yeah. So we're going to kind of focus on the septic part. We could maybe get into stormwater another day.
Yeah.
But,
understood.
Just to break it down. So I guess for somebody who, we do deal with a lot of customers that maybe they lived in the city their whole life.
Yep.
How would you explain what a septic system is to somebody who has no experience and doesn't really know what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Sure. So, in the what we call big pipe world, right? You have public sewer, public water. You might have townhomes in a highly dense area, for example. But out here in the rural areas, certainly where I grew up, we didn't have access to that, so we had to put on-lot septic systems. And so you can imagine each individual home would have an on-lot septic system. So that septic system would serve just that one home in most cases. And what we're here to talk about today is for that application. So instead of in a public sewer, you'd have everything collected in pipes and travels to a sewage treatment plant somewhere in the area. That sewage is then treated and put back in the environment. On an on-lot septic system, we're going to actually collect that septic and wastewater. We're going to put it into a tank. We're going to take some of the solids and scum out of it in that tank, and we're going to let it go out back into the absorption area, which would be putting it back in the environment in a renovated, safe way, so that once it goes back into the environment and makes its way to your drinking water, which it will eventually, that it's safe and renovated and clean, that you and your neighbor don't get sick. That's that's great. Short version.
Great explanation of one. So, and this is kind of what I on the On Your Land side, kind of how a lot of times it works out. We get a customer that calls us up and they have a raw piece of ground, right? It's maybe wooded, maybe a meadow or something like that. But in either case, there's really been no steps to even start the development process on that lot. What are some of the things you might talk to that customer about that first phone call?
Yeah, so
you take that call.
Yeah, I do take that call. So there's a lot of, it's interesting because a lot of our clients will come to us and they're very they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So they really don't know what to look for and the questions to ask and that sort of thing. So when they're looking at raw land, obviously there's a lot of complexities to that in terms of, it's not just as simple as, we just like to get soils testing done. We have to look at, for instance, slopes of the property. If you're building on a steep slope or a mountain, let's say a hill, to look at brush. Is there a lot of brush on the property? Recently, we came into a situation with raw land where there was a lot of bamboo. Well, that presents problems. How wooded is it? Do we have are these trees that have just, started growing, or are these mature trees? These are things, accessibility we think about. We need to know the proper, in terms of proposed location of the house. Do you know where that, where you propose the location to be? Has there been a survey done, conducted? Do we know where the boundaries are? Things like that. What are you planning in terms of, your bedroom count, your bedroom size? Also specifically in terms of your township, what township, municipality are you in? Depending on the township, that really can come up with some other factors in terms of the type of testing. Do you need one area or two areas to be tested?
Right.
Things like that. So we certainly need essentially the clients to be prepared with just some basic information, your site location, again, keeping in mind, are there wetlands on the property, obstructions to accessibility, you have a survey done, things like that would really inform us a little bit more in terms of, can we proceed with on-lot septic testing right away, or do we need to conduct more of a on-site consultation to do some more, of that digging in terms of details that we would need to really understand whether or not on-lot septic can be placed on that property or installed on that property.
Yeah.
What else do you have to add to that?
Yeah. No. And again, the you can't. This isn't a one size fits all.
Right.
So every lot's different and every scenario is different. And maybe it had some testing already done. Maybe there was already a survey done.
Right.
Maybe there's pins. Maybe there's not. Maybe that township. Maybe somebody has some history on it. Maybe they bought it from a builder and it already had some of this preliminary work done. And so they are ready for soil testing. That's cool,
Yeah.
So just trying to uncover that quickly with an IT person who is super smart but doesn't do this every day. So you're
Sure.
trying to dig for questions, and there
Yeah.
might be some back and forth. And whereas sometimes maybe if it's we don't know much, we better get out there and meet them on site and
Exactly.
actually take a look at the property, or maybe do some preliminary. We can look some things up from our office, right? We can do some Google mapping and we can see what's around it, and Ross can even look at some soil maps to determine what's in the area and what might be feasible. Or, knowing Ross, some of our team members, maybe they've done work in the area. Oh, I know where that is,
Right.
and it can help there's a creek in there, isn't there? That can make some big differences
Yeah.
in that developable land,
Yeah.
development land.
And actually that brings up a good point. There are times when I'll have a client call in, and they don't have a lot of the information. Maybe they're just in the very beginning stages, and they don't know if there's wetlands. They don't really know a lot. And so in that case, we'll call them back, but we'll do some searching. In other words, we'll do some investigation on the property. We'd love to know if they're working with, again, a builder. Are they working with an engineer? These are people that I'd like to reach out to and to discuss, more of the details of the property. In other words, what stage are they in? And then that helps me to be informed as well, and in terms of what needs to be done. The other thing I'll do is if I'm limited with the information that they give me, I might go online and look at township ordinance in terms of what ordinances they have and requirements, or if the client gives me permission, I will contact the the sewage enforcement officer, and we'll discuss the property as well. Sometimes they're very plugged in and they know the property very well. They've been there before. There's been testing done on it in the past, et cetera, that they'll be able to kind of clue us in. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of factors
Sure.
when we come up with properties that are raw land that need to be considered. So
Yeah.
And a sewage enforcement officer is, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're basically someone that's been hired by the township
Yes.
to
Yeah.
kind of be their expert in that subject matter.
They issue, deny,
That's
and
right.
revoke on-lot septic permits. So they're the person for that township or municipality. Here in Berks, each municipality has its own sewage enforcement officer. You get into Montgomery, Bucks, and Chester counties, they have their own health departments, which then employ individual SEOs for that entire county, and then they each cover their own section of the county. Lancaster, Lebanon, and York have individual SEOs per township, et cetera. But their job is to be part of the soil testing for a developed piece of property or repair, like a septic repair. Their job is to review a design, that's something that we might create and submit to them. They would be the person that would review it, prove it, and then issue a construction permit to build that on-lot septic system for that property. Whether that's a repair for an existing home or for Berks Homes, who's building new house on a new lot.
yeah.
Right.
And it's important to note too that the a lot of clients will ask us, well, do they need to be involved in the process? And they do.
Yes.
So that
Yeah.
is something that they are required. And we do the coordination of that. So the client does not have to worry about anything like that in terms of who do I call and what do I do. And we take care of all of that for them. But we definitely do have to get the sewage enforcement officers involved. They witness the testing that we do. And so just to ensure that, everything's done by regulation and that the ordinances are met and requirements.
Yeah. Yep.
And for sometimes we get contacted about lots where, and you mentioned it, Brent, where there had been some testing in the past. Is I guess number one, is there any kind of deadline or expiration date on those, so to speak?
Yeah.
And then I guess, is it the sewage enforcement officer's call whether they're acceptable or not?
Yes and yes.
Yes. Okay. So if you're talking about
Go ahead.
So, for instance, if there's been previous testing done on the lot, we will have clients who come to us with what we call the 290A forms.
Right.
And these are formal reports from DEP that really list the probes evaluation, which we'll get into, and the percolation testing. So we can kind of see how the soils, in other words, what system options they have, and what the soils said. In other words, is it unsuitable or suitable? The problem is that sometimes these tests are 10 years old, right? And so there is a limit. There is a time limit, and that is 6 years. So you have 6 years from the date that you've tested in order to proceed forward with a design to install the systems, to have the system installed. However, if you do lapse in that and you find that you have testing that's gone over that, then you do what's called, we can contact the sewage enforcement officer and again coordinate that, or the client can go directly to the sewage enforcement officer and essentially ask for a re-verification of the testing. So it's really at that point up to the sewage enforcement officer's discretion whether they will validate and re-verify that testing.
Yeah, and you can imagine too, a lot that had no bamboo once and
now
was tested and now is grown over with bamboo. They're probably going to require a retest, to be able to re-verify. You get my point. I mean, a lot looks way different even a year later. Even though you dug those holes and backfilled them, and when those weeds take over, it can be like a jungle by the time you come back a year later to try to find where those perks happen and that kind of thing. It can be a little tricky.
And that's why we say too, after the soils testing is done and everything, either leave those flags in place or put stakes in so that you know exactly where, if you're not planning to do this right away, just make sure that it's clearly marked.
Yeah.
We often also, with survey locating, the testing, we highly recommend that be done so that if you are looking to go beyond that time period of those 6 years, you can take that survey with the locations of the soils testing to the sewage enforcement officer. And oftentimes, as long as the soil's not been disturbed, that's the other thing too.
Right.
So you have to make sure that soils testing area is not compromised, meaning you can't have any building on that. You can't, be taking large equipment over it. You can't have structures over it. So it really has to remain as it is. You can mow over it, that kind of thing, but that's about it. And so at any rate, so we essentially, do advise for survey locating the testing. That really benefits the client in terms of the SEO, being able to approve of that so long as the soils haven't been compromised after testing. Something that we also do here at EDS is that if you do have a client that comes into that situation where they have old testing, and let's say I discuss it with the SEO and the SEO says, yes, absolutely, go ahead and restake it, and then I'll go ahead and do the re-verification. We will do the restaking as well. So that is the service that we provide.
Okay, so let's move on a little bit to, let's say we kind of did that preliminary conversation with the customer and everything's kind of going to the next step here. That first time you meet, out on the site, whether that's the testing day or maybe it's just a preliminary meeting out there, what kind of conversations are going on as far as where the testing is going to be done, on that lot?
Yeah, so one of the big steps in installing or designing a septic system truly is isolation distances, which means it's a fancy way of saying how far you are from different components, property lines. The big one is a well, and that includes a neighbor's well. So if you have a new lot and you have a house on either side or behind you or in front of you, whatever, you need to find their wells, and you actually have to measure 100 feet and create an arc. So you have a 100-foot distance from all those wells, And so you start carving out the actual space on the property that you could potentially even test. So if you took that raw lot and you took everybody's well and you drew a big arc on it and you measure back 10 feet from everybody's property line or your property lines, and you think about where you want to put the house and the driveway, and well, there's a creek back here, there's a rock outcrop back here, and where there's
Start eliminating.
Yeah, right.
And so you have this blank slate, and you start shading out areas. You're like, can't test here, can't test there, and typically what happens is you end up with an area that you're like, well, I got to test here, and so that's where you begin your testing. So that would be the first step in saying, where are we even going to look? And again, you can punch a well, provided you can get a truck in there. You can have some flexibility with that, even though the driller might have a preference. But easier to drill somewhere else than you can't move your septic. So that will dictate those isolation distances is where you start.
Yeah, for sure. And we always like to know the proposed house location. So if you're building, you meet with the client and they say, hey, we would really, we want this view, let's say, right? And so we want the house here. Yeah, oftentimes we can make that happen.
Certainly want to try. Yeah,
we want to try. I mean, truly, that's we'd love that to happen, but because of what you've mentioned.
Some common sense. You got if you have a small lot, it's gonna be tighter.
Tighter, yeah.
So you're gonna have less options. Where the bigger it is, you might have some more options as far as where you put the house and the driveway and access, et cetera.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, and let me know if I'm wrong here, but where that testing is done is ultimately where the absorption bed or the drain field.
Yes.
That's where it needs to be located.
Yes.
Just because the soils.
Yep. For the sake of the conversation, maybe just to clarify, you have a house, you have pipes that lead from the house to a tank, and the tank's underground, often concrete, could be plastic, and that's where everything's collected. All your solids and nasty stuff stay in the tank. Mm-hmm. The water's separated using simple baffling or even some screen filters, and so your solids and your scum layers stay in that tank. And at that point, we call it effluent, and it's a fancy way of saying sewage water.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the solids
Much better word.
Yeah.
Sounds a little cleaner, doesn't it?
Sounds a little
like
nicer.
that.
That's
A little better for our industry. It sounds smarter. But effluent comes out the tailpipe of that tank.
Right.
And that's what travels out to maybe a pump tank that lifts it to a sand mound. We've all seen those ugly sand mounds.
Yeah.
Maybe a pump tank that lifts it to a sand mound, or it could flow gravity just out through some pipe series and underground into some trenches or just a bed. Mm-hmm. And we call that the absorption area. And again, some people call it a drain field. I've heard leach field. We call it absorption area in our world.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And that's basically the area where the testing's done.
Yes, that's
right.
We can we have flexibility with tanks and pipes and all that, but the actual absorption area matter. That's what we're testing for that site.
Right.
Yeah.
So how does can weather play a factor on whether the test can be done or not?
Great question.
Yeah.
Take that one. I mean,
For sure. Yes.
common sense applies.
Yeah.
Common sense applies.
It's
That's
done
right.
outside, right?
Yeah,
So-
yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think, we try to kind of test obviously good weather, right? But if we have significant rain, what's that? What is that? So if it rains, let's say 1.5 inches to 2 inches or greater within a 2 to 3 day period of time, that's when we would reconsider testing. We have to look at the lands, of course. We have to understand the property, and like right now, we're at a water table's at its highest. This is we've been having to postpone testing recently over the last few weeks, and just move testing because there's too much saturation in the ground. So weather does definitely play a role. The best times to test is essentially summer, fall, and early winter. When you get into the winter time and you have, let's say, significant snowfall, and then we have the thaw, and that's what happens is then once the thaw happens, the melt kind of percolates through and really saturates the ground. And of course, in the spring, we have saturation with the rains and so forth. So that's generally the rule of thumb.
I have another theory on that was taught to me, and some would argue with me on this, but it's not necessarily a no-no to do a perk in the spring.
Right.
Well, I would agree with this theory that if it needs, your septic has to work year-round.
Right.
So, I mean, you might get a better perk rate in the summer, which means that your absorption area might be a little bit smaller. At the same time, it needs work in the spring too. So
That's right.
there's some give and take there, but it doesn't, again, common sense applies. You get 3 inches of rain, time to bump that a week. You know?
Yeah.
We're going to move that back a little bit,
Right.
just to
Exactly.
help you out and get a better reading for our design.
Yeah. And a lot of clients will call us, particularly, oh, it's going to rain. You know, they'll call us the week before. Oh, it's going to rain on Wednesday. We generally do not postpone or cancel any testing until the day of, unless we know we've gotten into a really, rainy period. Right.
I think the weatherman don't even get that right.
Yeah.
So let's not get too excited. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I know sometimes 2 passing locations are required on a lot. Is that dictated
Yeah.
entirely by the township, or how do we, because sometimes it seems like it's, in my experience anyway, sometimes it seems like it's important and sometimes, it's not.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And really, this is on a case-by-case basis in terms of township. So one of the things we look at, particularly, let's say it's an existing lot, it is a newer lot, let's say, that's been developed. Generally speaking, they will already have replacement area testing done. If it's an older lot, oftentimes that may only come with just one area, what we call primary area testing. So the way to kind of navigate that is to, contact the township. So that's what we'll do. Even with the county health departments, let's say, I will contact an SEO from a county health department who will basically instruct me to contact the township. So oftentimes it's on a case-by-case basis. Some townships don't require replacement area. That's what you mean by a second area.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I should probably explain that. So your primary area of testing is where you're testing for your primary location for the septic system to be installed. That is going to be the system that's installed to essentially take care of the house wastewater, right? But your replacement area testing is a secondary area in which assures the township, the municipality, right? Also the homeowner, that there is a secondary site in the event that primary site fails. So then you have another alternate site that you can use, and you have testing that's passed, and you can install that system there. But yes, it is definitely on a case-by-case basis. I mean, that's what we have found. Some townships we found say, yes, we need replacement area testing with this land, and then in the same situation on another township, they'll say, no, we only require primary area only.
Yeah, and one last not so important note is that if we're going to go out and test 2 sites for primary replacement, we'll use the better of the 2 for the primary.
Sure. Right.
Not that, that seems like common sense, but we would take the better of the 2, which usually means it's a little bit better perk rate or a little bit better soil, maybe deeper soils, well-draining soils, that we'll use that better site for the primary and leave that, we'll call it less than site, as a backup for a rainy, hopefully a long, long time later.
Yeah, I've always tried to explain when it is required that the lifespan of the house, if the house is kept up and maintained, should exceed that of the septic system. So at some point, hopefully, like you said, in the distant future, and hopefully not the original customer, somebody down the road will have to foot the bill for installing a second system.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Did that help? Did that answer?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, because I never really understood it seemed like it would be from job to job, be a little bit different. But, so why don't we talk about the testing a little bit? Walk us through. I know there's you guys obviously have a lot of knowledge in that subject, but for someone who might not understand exactly what happens on those, there's 2 types of tests primarily that are done. Maybe if you kind of touch on each one of them a little bit.
Sure. So it starts with soil probe evaluations, and also maybe called test pits. Essentially, we would have the sewage enforcement officer join us on the property. We would come out as a consultant and have an excavator there, and we would literally dig. Once we did our isolation distances and we figured out, okay, this is our area that we want to look at, we would do test pits, and it's a fancy way of saying we dig 2 holes. Okay, we're going to dig a hole on either side of this area, and their test pits are typically 7 feet deep, 2 feet wide, and then we build a ramp out of the hole so that we can actually walk ourselves down in the hole, and that's where we evaluate the depth of the well-draining soil available to us in that, looking at the soil horizons while we're down inside the pit, if that makes sense.
Right.
So the top, we have our our grass, or the top layer, right, our topsoil, and we start working on our soil horizons. We have a soil scientist on staff, Ross, Ross is our gentleman who gets in these pits and is way better with soils than I am, and certainly a lot more experience, and he will tell us where this LZ, or also known as a limiting zone, is located in those soil horizons. The deeper the LZ, the better, right?
Yep.
Once we get down deeper, we're essentially establishing this limiting zone, and all the soil above that to the surface is our suitable soil to renovate effluent. There's that word again, right? And so that effluent comes out of the treatment tanks and comes to this absorption area, and hopefully we have as many inches as possible of usable soil to renovate that effluent before it hits that groundwater down in the ground and cleans it all up before it gets there. But the shallower that limiting zone, we get into some tougher conditions, and there's some magic numbers in there, 20 inches being the first magic number. We want to get 20 inches on the LZ or greater to really have, quite frankly, some more options for that property and that septic system. So that's the probe valve. Go ahead, you have a question.
I was just going to say, so the limiting zone, is that just some sort of feature in the soil that's preventing it from being able to continue absorbing the way we...
Treating the effluent. So the number one is a seasonal high water table, where there's proof found in the soil horizon that would imply and prove that water that had gotten as high as that point and drained back out. Okay, so at that point, if the water was ever up that high again, the effluent, would hit that liquid and it would no longer be able to be treated. We have now an anaerobic situation. The water can't breathe and we're not going to get any further treatment. The next one is rock, fractured rock. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine it's draining all nice and neat down this nice suitable soil, hits rock, and it just takes off. Well, it's not being treated, and it's going to wind up likely in somebody's well, and make them, could potentially make people sick.
And we call that also like a restrictive layer.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
One of to kind of put it in layman's terms, kind of help clients understand that whole process. Think about if you ever heard, or if you're an avid camper, let's say, or you do a lot of treks in nature overnights, and you're backpacking or whatnot, and there's this creek there. Well, you're not supposed to drink the creek water or the stream water because you don't know if it's adequately cleaned, right? So a lot of people know the whole thing to do is to get, soil and whatever, and, you can have a little screen or a filter, and then you can take that water and you can put it in that tube or whatever you're using. And at the end of it, the water that drips out should have cleaned, any of the bacteria or whatnot, and make it generally safer for you to drink.
Sure. Right?
So it's that kind of same principle when you're talking about the effluents, right? This is the gray water or the black water. Your gray water is, this is maybe dishwater, washing machine, water, or your black water is coming from your actual, toilets that you're flushing. But that effluent that's obviously been separated from the solids and the scum in the tank and goes and is dispersed in the absorption field, that percolates through the soils, and that's what helps to clean it. So we need as many inches as possible of that good soil, so it gives the opportunity of that effluent to be cleaned more and more and more and more and more. Does that make sense?
It does. And to get back to we talk about options, which we'll get into in a little bit as well. If we don't have enough soil, we add sand.
Right.
That's right.
All right, so that's where the sand mound comes in.
The sand mound, right.
Right, so we hit that magic 20-inch limiting zone, and then let's just say the LZ is 22 inches. We're going to add sand on top of that soil to then create enough distance to get, which we're looking for 48 inches, to get that effluent treated before we get out to the bottom of that untreatable soil. Okay.
Sure. There you go. Right.
But we can get into that when we get into talking about options and different things too. But
yeah.
So the second part would be the percolation test.
Correct.
Right?
AKA the perc test.
Sure.
Most people have heard of this perc test before.
Right.
Maybe not just test pits, but they're like, oh yeah, I've heard of a percolation test. So now we'll say, in not all, but in some cases, we dig 2 test pits, and we've said, hey, we have enough limiting zone in both of these pits. Both of them are deep enough that this area in between can be used as our absorption area. And it is important we don't put our test pits in the middle. We put them on the outsides. They will not go inside of the absorption area.
Okay.
So now we've established our area, and we're going to do what's called a percolation test. And so, again, we're going to just assume this is a 3 or 4 bedroom home, and we're going to do a percolation test, and we're going to assume an LZ, whatever, and we're going to dig percolation holes. 8 to 10 inches in diameter, usually 20 to 36 inches deep, depending on your LZ, right, and your pits on the sides. and then we're going to dig 6 of those, and we're going to uniformly space them in this open space. Typically, they'll be on contour, which means the slope. The slope does matter, so we want to put our mound or our bed on the contour of the soil slope, and then we'll dig our perc holes in uniform on that slope, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And a perc test is we dig these 6 holes, we scarify the holes, we scratch them so we don't have any smearing in those holes. We want to get, when we dump water in those holes, we want to have direct contact with friable soil, not the shovel smeared soil face, if you know what I'm talking about. When you dig a hole with a shovel, it leaves that smear.
Right.
We scratch all that smearing away. We put a little bit of gravel or sand in the bottom to help to, when we pour it in, we want it to hit that gravel and just disperse it out and get in that soil structure, and we measure it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
We measure how fast that water's absorbed by those holes. I'm getting pretty practical here, but and we do a perc test, and so we measure over a period of time how much water we can get into these holes, and we come up with an average perc rate. And so now we have LZs, and we got percolation rates. Right, we have isolation distances, we have any other obstacles, we have slope, that we can start thinking about what type of technology we even have to use. Maybe there's 4 options, maybe there's 1, maybe there's none. If we've gotten to a perc test, we're probably looking at options. Usually the probes are what would, if we can't find a probe on the property, we're done.
You don't get to the perc test.
Yeah, you don't get the perc test, right? So you start with the probes. Those are the 2 tests that you were alluding to.
And in terms of the process with clients that I walk them through, oftentimes they'll say, well, I want a perc test, right?
Yeah.
And they don't recognize that, well, we need to do a step before that. So day 1 is really when we do the probes evaluation, and we do have excavation equipment. So those pits are dug to about 7 feet?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So an average of 7 feet, let's say.
6, 7 feet.
6, 7 feet, yeah. And so that's done on day 1. So that's when your soil scientist would come out with an excavator and dig those probes. If we're doing the percolation, if those 2 probes are conducive for a conventional system, then of course we'll move on to the perc test. The day 1, if we do the perc test the second day, we will have our technician come out on day 1 and also do prep work, meaning they'll dig the perc holes, those 6 holes, and they'll scarify them, etc., and then they'll do what's called a pre-soak. So oftentimes, kind of the process that we use is we like to do the percolation prep on the same day that we've done the probes. Then we can do everything. It's the most efficient. Exactly right. We can get them done in 2 days, the soils testing. And then the following day, once the pre-soaking has been done for the percolation test, we'll do the full perc test, and that's when we come back with more water, and we're percolating. We're putting the water in the holes, and we're measuring the rate. Gotcha. So
Natalie, maybe you could talk about quickly timeline. This is the number one. We get a lot of questions. How long we're assuming a good SEO can get us in 2 days back to back.
Right.
Once in a while they might be busy. It could be the middle of the summer and they're jammed up, and they got a probe on a Friday and they're going to do a perc the next Friday.
Right.
And you don't have a choice. So it's like, we'll take it. We get it a lot. Well, it's a real estate transaction, septic system fails, whatever. And it's like, how fast can you get this thing done? On average, from the phone call to the perc test?
I mean, it's a good question. So we generally say, again, we have to coordinate with everyone. So we're coordinating with our excavator contractor, with your sewage enforcement officer, et cetera. So, and we do like to have the clients available on day 1, so that they're involved in the process of knowing, okay, where's the system going to be located? Right. So we like them to be involved in the process. It's not mandatory, but we do encourage that. Yeah. So I would say, from the time that we do soils testing to the time that design is done is generally a 4 to 6 week process.
Yeah. And I would say, I would agree with that. And I would say, that's assuming that weather, SEOs,
right,
everybody's cooperating. We're playing we're all singing the same song.
Yeah.
We can turn that time around. But anyway, that's something that always pops up, is like, how long is this going to take?
Yeah, for sure. And in terms of, and I think you might have touched on this too, in terms of the probes versus the perc. So they both do something a little different, right? So your probe is essentially looking to see what type of system options you would have.
And where.
Yeah. And the location, right? Where your perc rate, which happens, again, after that, is really going to determine how large, what's the size of the absorption area.
Square footage. Yeah.
The square footage. So that's why both tests need to be done, together, so that we
the
get
faster the perc rate, the smaller the system. Right? 'Cause it's going to perk faster, so you need less square footage. If it's going to perk slower, you're going to need more square footage to get rid of that water.
That's right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so you guys fill out there's a Pennsylvania standardized form for that, right? And
Yep.
That's completed at the time of the testing?
Yes.
Right there out on site,
Yes.
I suppose?
We do a field sheet, so we'll have our technicians or soil scientists. We have it's kind of the raw,
Right.
Yeah.
chicken scratch, if you will,
We-
but then we do
reprint
the
it.
formal report.
It's much
Yeah.
nicer
Clean
when
it
you
up a
come
little
back
bit.
and clean up a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of guys will write up the soil profiles. So that when the SEO or the soil scientist or consultant will actually write the soil horizons out. And it's very technical, and they actually write these soil horizons out, and then they write the living zone and why and all that on that same form. And then there's a form at the bottom, or a spot at the bottom for the percolation test. But yeah, we found that they come back a little muddy and
Right.
torn on
Yeah.
the corners, and they're not something you want to submit with your nice, pretty permit. So,
We always, yeah.
Natalie's got it on speed dial. Like, all right, this is what you're going to do. You're going to come back, and you're going to take a fresh one. You're going to, and you're going to transpose that to that and make it look nice. So,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it does make a big difference when you then submit your final product.
Right. And that goes along with the design. So that's the second stage of that is once we have the soils testing done, it's reported on the DEP 290A form. Then we take that and then we finish the design once that's all done. And then we put that together with the design along with the on-lot septic permit application. So that's another step in this process.
Yep.
And deliver that to the sewage enforcement officer.
So is that about the stage when you have the report that you start talking about the different options if there are multiple
Yes.
different types
Yes.
of
So
systems? that
after
would
soil
work?
testing.
Yeah, for sure. So what we
Yep.
do, what we have found very helpful, it's interesting because we'll have clients who'll say, I want this, I want a sand mound. They don't understand that what the other options are because
Right.
there's many different options. It's really, if you have those options available, again, if the testing shows that you have, could be maybe you have an Elgin system option, maybe you have an ACK-grade, you can, reduce the profile of a sand mound system and you can have more of a smaller profile, I
Much
guess you
smaller
could
profile,
say,
yeah.
right?
Yep.
Those are options as well. There's many different types of systems, so you may have more options available to you. But yes, at any rate.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a stage we like to get involved too, if possible, because
Yes, right.
there's some factors that interrelate. So, if we know how much dirt we're going to be creating,
Displacing, yeah. Yep.
If we're going to have quite a bit, then a sand mound might not be the worst thing in the world because we can use a lot on the berms,
Yep.
That's
the
Blend
right.
it in.
sides
Yep.
of that mound.
You might have a steeper slope, or sure.
But if we don't, then something like an ACK-grade bed you mentioned, a different type of system would be with a lower profile might work just as well from a cost standpoint because if we don't have as much dirt,
Yes.
then
Yeah.
we're not paying to haul
Right.
dirt in, which sometimes kind of so there's a cost component that
That's right.
that's like when we like to kind of be involved somewhat in that conversation too. But then so the customer then makes a decision on the type of system. The size of the system is dictated by bedroom count, correct?
Yeah. So, well,
For the
the
most part.
design flow rates, your
Yeah.
gallons per day.
Right.
Another fun conversation.
Peak flow rate.
Yeah.
Right.
Peak design flow rate.
Yeah.
So it starts with 400 gallons for a 3-bedroom house. So whether you have a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, or a 3-bedroom house, your minimum design flow rate in Pennsylvania will be 400 gallons per day. And everybody freaks out about that number because it's like, we don't use 400 gallons a day. We know. It is a peak design flow rate. We're expecting about half of that. And yes, your family of 4 probably will use about 200 gallons per day, give or take, average throughout the week. So that's the and then we add 100 gallons of peak design flow per bedroom in PA. So it doesn't matter how many people live in there. It doesn't matter how many bathrooms you have there.
Right.
Right.
A good designer will take into account the amount of people that are projected to live there. In my humble opinion, they'll look at it and say it's a 3-bedroom house. We have a family of 6 moving in there, and we have enough space. Maybe we add a little bit more square footage to the absorption area. Maybe we add a little more tankage for treatment. Just some common sense type things for a good designer. But the regulations would say that for a 3-bedroom house, 400 gallons a day of peak design flow rate, and then 100 gallons per bedroom after that added to the 400. So 5, 6, 7.
Yep. And the other thing for a client to keep in mind too, so for a house build, if they're looking in the future, let's say they're not finishing off the basement, right? But they
Yes,
want to do
yes,
that.
yes.
Yeah. They want to do that sometime later in the future. So we do like to ask that question.
Yes.
If you
Great
are
point.
if
A
you're
good
looking
designer will ask that, yes.
exactly. If you're looking to, add in the future, whether that's a bedroom or 2, it'd be best to do that now because you don't want to it's going to be a lot costlier to do that and amend the, you might not even have
Yeah.
the space to do
Yeah,
that.
right.
Sure.
So you might come into some issues if you do want to add bedroom counts in the future. So now's the time when you're doing the septic testing and design to get that out of the way.
And you guys would in essence design the system for the future.
You got
Correct.
Yeah, and then
Correct.
it would be sized appropriately.
Lot-
That's right.
A lot cheaper that first time than it would be
Yes.
to add later.
For
Right.
sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's say we have the bedroom count nailed down, we have the type of system nailed down. Next it's you guys are doing the design,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I guess walk us through what's the time frame for getting the design done, and then how do you take that to the point that you have an actual permit in your hand,
Yeah.
a septic permit?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Again, we would still be within that 4 to 6 week time period, but from the time we have to do essentially right after the consult. So once we do the consult with the client and we determine, and obviously including yourself as well in the process, understanding what design it would be, then from there we're essentially doing what's called a stakeout. So we're going to go on the property, we're going to shoot our elevations and collect some data there, and then once that is completed, that data and the scope of the project along with the soils testing, that gets transferred over to our design engineer. And generally from the time of staking to the time that the design is completed is a 10 business day process.
Okay.
So
That's
it's
quick.
really, it's not that
Yeah.
long. Now what could jeopardize that a little bit is, again, particularly right now, spring, summer, fall, we get into a really busy time period where everybody's wanting their soils testing, and so
Right.
we're really overloaded with design work. But generally speaking, we keep our clients very informed in terms of if we project that time period to extend, let's say 5 more days, but we're still within that 10 to 15 day mark.
And once it comes back from the designer, hey, we're done, we will print off copies of these designs.
Right.
Every municipality has a different way of receiving permits, or I should say designs.
Mm-hmm.
And so some require one copy along with your soil testing and your DEP application, and maybe they have their own internal application you have to fill out, and then you put it all together as a packet, print as many copies as they desire, and you mail them to them. And then they actually physically get them, review them, and then that SEO is the individual who would then approve that design and that permit to say, hey, I approve this, it's ready to be constructed, and now you have a construction permit.
Yeah, and so those steps. So the first step would be, again, once we know the design,
Right.
it's facilitating that on-lot septic permit application. So what we'll do is I'll connect with the client. I'll generally do this electronically, so that I'll submit the permit to them and using, an electronic signature type of application, and they'll go ahead and fill it out and send that back to us. And then once that's done, we're waiting for our design engineer to be done with the design. Right. And so,
That's what we'll do.
exactly. And then we put the application along with the design. And then we do all if they're, let's say, if one particular sewage enforcement officer says, like you said, wants one copy, then we print off one copy. But we'll mail those. So we take care of all of that, mail that to the SEO. If the SEO were to come back to us and say, hey, we need an amendment, that happens too. It's not
Sure.
very often, but sewage enforcement officers might have a slight amendment that they need done. We take care of that as well. And so we go ahead and do any corrections or amendments needed and send that back. So in terms of that whole entire process, from the permit application to the design, to the submission, to any amendments, that's all taken care of by us. So it's, yeah. And like I said, within that 10-day period. Yeah. And then really they're ready for, once that happens and they get the approval from the sewage enforcement officer, we'll send the client an email, and that email will essentially say, here's your design draft. Everything's approved. Now you're ready to move forward with, again, the installation. We'll generally copy you on that, and if we're working with an individual
Yep.
client. And then they're ready for install once it's all approved and they get the final permit that's been signed by the sewage enforcement officer and the final design approval from the sewage enforcement officer. That's generally mailed to the applicant on file, aka owner. And once they get that in the mail, they're good to go.
Okay. I guess important to note that the test site has to be protected.
You beat me to it, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
From the
So-
time that you do it until.
That's right.
So yeah, that's right, that primary and replacement area need to be protected.
Yes.
The moment that they're identified, it can be I have seen it happen where
Yeah.
it doesn't get roped off, and the easiest thing to do is just to rope it off. Put some stakes in the ground, get some cheap string, and just wrap it up and tell everybody come on the property, especially if you're working with a builder or any other contractors. Be like, listen, guys, you can't drive on this, you can't park on this, you can't drop material on this. Don't touch it. Don't look at it. Don't walk on it. Just stay off of it. You know.
Yeah.
Well,
But,
we flag it too.
yeah,
So
well, yeah.
so we do flag it. So it is flagged.
Yeah.
It's it's not it's not a mystery where it's at.
Yeah.
But yes, those are the rules. Don't
And
do
and,
anything like
and
that.
even the replacement and like you can see, I mean, even like on a half-acre lot, it gets pretty, it gets in the way.
Yeah.
And people are literally driving around it, especially the pettibone guys and stuff, and like those
Sure.
things leave deep ruts. And the construction site, as you know, it gets muddy for a while, and tracks everywhere, and it's like you just got to stay off that area. And you can just common sense. Again, you have this undisturbed soil that we've tested. We literally dumped water in it to measure how fast it would absorb. If you drive over it and
Compact
pack it
it,
down,
yeah.
it's not rocket science. It's gonna be a
Right.
problem,
Yeah.
So, but it can be tempting to be like, wow, we could just like park over there, especially on a tight lot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're
right.
we're always trying to keep after the guys to
Yeah,
make
yeah.
sure that area's respected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you guys that we didn't touch on here? I think we got a pretty good general overview. I'm hoping the next time we see each other might be out on site and we could kind of take a field trip out there and,
Oh, yeah.
and
That'd
watch
be fun, yeah.
That
some
would
of the
be fun.
testing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just wanted to thank you so much for joining us and going over all this
Absolutely.
information. I think it's very helpful to all of our prospective customers out there because it is one of those areas that can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
And it makes, for every reason it should be, it's not something the general public is dealing with very often throughout the course of their life.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right.
So it's good to have the experts here. If any of our customers want to get in touch with you guys, what would be, obviously if they come to me, I'm going to be sending them your way, but let's say if someone wanted to get a hold of you guys directly, what's the best way to do that?
Well, the best way, you can obviously call or email. So our phone number, 610-582-0605, or email Natalie at edssoilconsulting.com.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for having
Yeah,
us.
And
absolutely.
we'll,
This was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do it again.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Let's get out in the field.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
All right.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks.